aspect of our work. Really interesting.
Okay, everybody, this is Phil McGillivary from the U.S. Coast Guard, and he's here to present on current Arctic policy. And he's with the U.S. Coast Guard, and he's also host of this conference. And welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so I am the science liaison for the Coast Guard, and I've been asked to speak today about Arctic issues. I am also the science manager for all the assets in the Pacific for science, but specifically for both the Coast Guard cutter Healy, our new cutter, and our Coast Guard cutter out of Polar Star, which is the more attractive one there on the other side, far side. So we have a long history of working in the Arctic, going back to the 1870s and 1880s. Mike Healy was the captain of the Bear, which worked up in the Arctic for more than 30 years, and that's who our new icebreaker is named after. And in terms of the real start for Arctic science, it was in 1881 with the first International Geophysical Year. That building there is the oldest building in Barrow. It's the first International Geophysical Observatory, now amended with some graffiti. We have a big concern in the Arctic, particularly for oil and gas development. Those are the lease sites there. These are pretty close to shore. Those are pretty far offshore in the Chukchi. So that is a problem for us in terms of what's going on. You'll notice that we have now the issue of methane hydrate. This is the map of where it is, and that's also way up there, including on land. So that's the issue of methane flux that we're jointly attempting to address with both NOAA and NASA. And this is the bottom line slide. So we have presidential directives that we work underneath. We had in 2009 a fisheries management plan banning fishing north of the Bering Straits in the United States. And we have an Arctic roadmap that my friend wrote. It was released in 2010. Another one was just released. And then the president set up an ocean policy task force, and he accepted their recommendations, and they decided to manage the Arctic out of the White House through the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Commission. So this is basically what that presidential directive said, sort of mom and apple pie. Security, environmental protection, manage the resources, including energy resources, strengthen international collaborations, that's a big part of it, work with the native communities, make sure their voices are heard, and try and continue to do more research and monitoring. And this is what the National Ocean Council said they wanted: improved environmental response management, which is a Coast Guard responsibility, better sea ice forecasts, which we also want because that's what leads us to do search and rescue that we kind of don't really like doing if we don't have to. Establishing a distributed biological observatory, improved communications, we have a ways to go on that one. Better mapping, also a ways to go on that one, and research coordination among the federal agencies. For some reason with our Coast Guard software, this slide didn't show up, but this is a picture of Russia and Alaska, and these are the observatories in the Bering Straits. So we have gotten a distributed biological observatory set up. It is an international operation for the countries you see across the bottom there, so that's getting done. I just wanted to mention also that there is an Arctic Observing Network that's internationally supported also. It's still going. But I wanted to point out that there is sampling across the Arctic, including on the Russian side as well. So they have a lot more sampling than we do at the moment. But we do have this joint project. It's a NOAA project that NOAA manages, that's continuing, that's looking in the Bering Straits area for fluxes of sea ice, the nutrient and water, saltwater and freshwater fluxes, and what's coming into the Arctic through the Bering Straits. There is an issue of trying to explore what's up there that we don't know about, and there's a Pacific Arctic group, that's what PAG is. So that's all of the Arctic countries that have vessels that are ice capable. So this is what there's US and international policy things. So this was mentioned earlier. In 2011, we got the search and rescue agreement signed. That relates directly to Coast Guard missions. And then we got a White House policy that came out last spring. And then followed that, there was another National Arctic Strategy Plan that came out for its implementation. And recently in the meeting in Kiruna, they have the oil spill preparedness and response. That directly relates to the Coast Guard as well. And we have a DoD strategy that came out, which had the same goals of cooperation and reducing conflict and trying to address the challenges of not knowing what change is happening in the Arctic. So this is the areas that the research policy, and we do research off of our icebreakers, sea ice studies, terrestrial studies, atmospheric studies, and establishing better observing systems, improving the climate models, including ice models, and also trying to deal with the adaptation for those communities. The Coast Guard has had to bring oil, and they had to bring water to one of the communities last year, and other communities were actually eroded so badly because of storms they had to be moved. There's also an issue of human health that's a big problem up there because of the drinking water issues. This slide was shown earlier by Paul Berkman. This shows how the Arctic search and rescue is divided up. It also shows whether the damage to the ships was due to ice or not ice. So you can see where a lot of the ship damage and issues are in terms of search and rescue. And so this is the Coast Guard strategy that came out in 2013 from John Oliver at Coast Guard headquarters. Again, improving domain awareness was the first thing on the list. This is the international aspect of modernizing governance and then building partnerships. So that's what the Coast Guard has been focused on doing, trying to deal with the other organizations, private, public, both national and international. So these are what the other final milestones that recently came out. So our commandant, our admiral, who is now the commandant select, came out with a strategy in January. And one of the things in that was to actually prevent illegal fishing in the Arctic. So that's an important thing for us. How are we going to do that? Well, one of the other things he put in there was to test, continue testing unmanned aircraft to counter the IUU threats. And so, of course, we work with NOAA and use their vessel monitoring systems, and we can use that in EEZ and treaty areas, and then outside of those areas, we can use the satellite AIS system. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. The other big thing that we're supposed to be doing is establishing an Arctic Coast Guard Forum, where all the countries around the boundary of the Arctic have the Coast Guard meet together and try and work together. And at the same time, it's very important for us to sustain our native partnerships. They're the people who live there, and we are responsible to them. So one thing that we're all waiting for is Secretary of State Kerry announced in February he's going to appoint a special representative to the Arctic. We think we know who that is, but we'll wait and see. And then finally, there was just another meeting in Nuuk, Greenland, and so they're going to discuss this. They've agreed to discuss keeping high seas fisheries out of the Arctic for the time being, but it wasn't voted on by everybody. And so there are other countries that are interested in fishing in the Arctic. And so there is this is actually called a tentative agreement technically. So we're going to try and see if we can't get that in the next year, push more to other countries as well and get them to agree. So another Navy policy came out for Arctic Roadmap into the future. The usual things, sovereignty, defense readiness, freedom of the seas, all good things, and a partnership with the Coast Guard and other government agencies. So it's near term, mid-term, and far term. And the near term is to actually work with the Coast Guard. We run the ships up there. The Navy doesn't have any that really can go up there. And this is one of the graphics from that report. Paul Berkman showed something like this. Basically, yes, the vessel traffic is expected to increase. And so because we're responsible for safety of life at sea and search and rescue, we need to be prepared for that. So what have we in the Coast Guard Pacific area, and I am in Pacific area here, been trying to do? We don't have a lot of money, so what I've been trying to do is partner with people. So we've partnered with NATO, and this is largely the work with Joao that he discussed yesterday. So this includes partners in Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, and Norway, trying to get unmanned systems to help us. If there's an oil spill up there, we're going to need the unmanned systems to work on them because our nearest assets for aircraft are 1,000 miles away, and we don't have good air hangars up there or anything like that. The other thing that I've been focused on is working with the Norwegians. The Norwegian government has said that they're going to install an unmanned aircraft surveillance system along their entire coast. They've already funded that project. And so there's a bunch of people working on that already. One of the key things is one of the doctoral students at NTNU in Trondheim is specifically focused on anti-icing techniques. And I've been working with him on that. If you wonder what that means, that's actually a very thin layer of carbon nanotubes on the aircraft that is electrically conducting so you can warm it up. The other thing, I did work with Paul Berkman's doctoral student, William Euchre, as has Kurt Schweer in the room, and the folks from Space Quest, Dino Lorenzini, getting him the AIS data. I'll show some of that in a minute. We've also been working with Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission very closely for years now to try and have whale tracking and detection systems to avoid whale ship collisions. And so that's already been put in place by the Canadians at Neptune, and we have some hydrophones that have been developed specifically to work with wave gliders. I'll show that in a minute too. We have a partnership with Mbari and Google Oceans that used a wave glider for ocean acidification, and it's also being used now by Margot and Homeland Security in tests. That's Margot there. In tests to listen for illegal fishing vessels around Hawaii. So, and I mentioned, so the other thing that Margot is supporting, and we're working with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, is an unmanned aircraft system for maritime surveillance, also for sea ice and marine mammal monitoring. So I just want to show you some of the posters from recent meetings. This is the work with Joao, and he's already shown some of this, how we have all the systems talking to each other, underwater, surface, and aircraft, and they're all queued in for adaptive sampling. If they see something anomalous or hear something anomalous, each one of them can communicate that to the other. It's much easier to have an unmanned aircraft find an oil slick and then send the autonomous underwater vehicle or the surface vehicle over than to try and use the battery power of your autonomous underwater vehicle to find it. So the Norway project, like I said, they're going to implement a coastal surveillance network for their entire coast with unmanned aircraft, and I'm cooperating with them on that. I'd like to point out that it's not just the university, it's actually supported by Statoil, as well, Maritime Robotics and Radio Nor Communications. Radio Nor has amazing communications, 300-kilometer range, and Maritime Robotics has been operating the unmanned aircraft for them in their tests to date. So 4 doctoral students on that now, 15 coming this September, and 1 postdoc. So as I mentioned, we all have worked with William Euchre, who's a great Navy lieutenant. He's on a submarine now under the Arctic, and he did his PhD at Cambridge, and I sort of helped set that up with Space Quest and got him the AIS data. So this was the data that Paul was talking about. Those are all the monthly ice on that side and ships on this side. I think this is a closer picture that shows for 1 year all of where the ship traffic was in the Arctic, within the Arctic Circle. So you can see most of it is over by Norway. And that's one of the reasons I think the Norwegians are interested in getting an unmanned aircraft detection system going. This is the other slide that Paul Berkman and Christina also showed. This is the high seas area of the Arctic right now. These divisions here are the habitat divisions. So there was previously an Arctic marine shipping assessment, and that's kind of what you got here. And we didn't think that that was very good, so that's why we worked with AIS. That took years to make, so that we could get this daily update. And so you can see where the ships are, and oh, I forgot to say, so this is also in terms of fishing vessel days. So it actually tells you by color, if you go down to details, who's fishing, and you can also break it up by country. So I wanted to talk very briefly about some of the things that are going on up there in terms of climate change and what we need to better understand. So Capelin basically have their spawning areas here. I picked them because they're sort of at the bottom of the smallest fish that's eaten by the other fish, by the cod, and some of the other fish up there. So the first thing is they have a very high interannual variability. So you don't really know how many you're going to get from 1 year to the next. They almost completely collapsed in the 70s. The fishing stock was closed for 5 years. It was reopened. They had a very large take last year, and they're very happy. But this year, they had to cut the quota 90%. So these sorts of huge variations are typical of things in the Arctic. It happens for many species. So there are still some conflicts among the countries up there over who's getting what quota and how those are being traded. And I will point out to you that the IUU cases in Norway were the last U. They were unreported. So that they were ships, when they boarded the ships, they found out they had twice as much fish as they were supposed to have in the hull. That's a difficult thing for us to work on. Without actually boarding the ship, you can have all the unmanned surveillance you want, but you're still going to have a hard time actually figuring that out. The one other thing I wanted to point out that's sort of an issue of concern is, if this water warms up, where are they going to go? There's no more north there. And so there's a big concern about not just the effect of ocean acidification, but what happens if it really does get warm. They can only spawn in certain areas, and there's no more areas other than Svalbard up there north of that. So this is, again, if you think that, so I'm supposed to be talking about how the illegal fishing in the Arctic, that was one of our Admiral's priorities. If you think you can just go do it in the summertime, yes again. There are people fishing up there pretty much year-round, and we have the data to show that. We also had NOAA go up and do some surveys in the Beaufort Sea in 2008, and they used these giant Bering Sea trawl nets, and they hadn't been up there in 30 years, and those were kind of pristine areas, and so there was a little bit of unhappiness of the fact that they had just trawled across the pristine seafloor and lost 5 nets worth more than $250,000. So we had a little bit of discussion with them about that, and reminded them that there were these things called video cameras, and there were also nets that don't have to be towed on the bottom. 98% of what they got was seafloor, not fish. So we've gotten them, we had a special seminar on non-trawl fisheries research methods, and got them some religion. So this is the whale ship collision avoidance thing. You can see the wave glider here. I don't have a picture with the hydrophones, but I think that was shown the other day. So the problem that we have here is that unlike the Atlantic side, our whales don't make noise most of the time, especially the bowhead whales in the Arctic. But you can detect them as an acoustic shadow, where there isn't any noise. It's just like, you know, if you're outside, you hear the wind blowing through the trees. You don't hear that in here. So this is an acoustic shadow. This method has been demonstrated, and this is what's in use by the Canadian Neptune system. And the reason that I should add, the reason we're concerned about this is the United States is talking about putting in another port north of the Arctic Circle in Alaska. And there's some other infrastructure issues. We have 15,000 whales going by there twice a year. So right in front of the port. So we're going to have a lot of collisions if we don't deal with this issue. This is the partnership with Google and Monterey Bay Aquarium. We wanted to be able to measure ocean acidification using a remotely operated system. Francisco Chavez has a great system that he and colleagues at McGillivary have developed. And so we were able to get the wave glider to have this measuring system in addition to doing the listening capabilities for the whales. And so I have been focused the last few years mostly on unmanned aircraft operations. This is the Raven unmanned aircraft. We got a bunch of those, 128, coming back from Afghanistan, the University of Alaska. I didn't quite get the hyperspectral imaging system. It got there one day too late in Barrow. But this is infrared, so you can see the ice ridges are what really stop ships. It's not ice per se. And ice ridging is what I was keen to measure. We also did, working with the Canadians, deployed an underwater mapping system on an AUV. And so it was useful for recording those. And you can see over here, we did actually do some seal work too. And that's the Scan Eagle launcher there. So let's see, and then this is just a similar picture that shows, oh, this is what I wanted to point out here. So there's a picture of our ship, and you can see the ice ridges here in white and infrared. What I wanted to point out is, this is the highest resolution satellite map you can get of sea ice. And this green line was supposed to be the ship track. You can see the red is the actual ship track. So the ability to have really good high resolution ice ridge imaging, this was all of us moving around was trying to get around the ice ridges, because we don't like going through the ice ridges. They do stop ships, including mine, and it burns a ton of fuel. So we got this COA from FAA to operate. It's the largest COA ever granted, and that's how we did these flights in the Arctic, and not a problem. So I just wanted to say that we have, these are the final slides. The concerns we have for the Arctic is, I'm very concerned about the Arctic Council countries not having a clue, frankly, about dealing with the native peoples. I've had lots of work with the Russians trying to get them up to speed. I've had many discussions with the Singaporeans and the South Koreans and the Japanese about trying to get them to understand these people whale up there. My job is to partially protect their right to whale. And if they're running their ship right through the middle of the whaling, that's not good. So part of it is making sure they understand how to interface with the natives. Part of that is to make sure that they don't actually run over the whales or come right in the way of the whaling or interfere with the whaling and scare them off because of the ship noise. And finally, they are technically, as I understand it, supposed to actually help support the native cultures, not just give them lip service. And so that's been a problem. The more they interact with the native cultures, the better they get a feel for the traditional ecological knowledge, the better they'll be able to manage things in the Arctic. So that's not a Coast Guard thing necessarily, although the Coast Guard supports that, but I'm the person that has to actually deal with the native people, and I get a phone call every time there's a foreign research vessel up there that's causing problems. And so I would like to get the other countries in the Arctic to recognize that they really, we have whaling people in Alaska, and they're part of our country, and we have to respect them as well. So basically, I just want to say that I think the key, and this is what our Admiral has supported and headquarters supports, is with international coordination, we think that we can have Arctic development that will lead to a new Golden North, and that's the cover of Fridtjof Nansen's book in Northern Mists, and this is a Barrow sunset. So that's probably good enough. Apparently I finished faster than I thought.
You're taking another question?
Yes.
What was the satellite that you used to take that lower res ice ridge satellite image?
Oh, that was an unmanned aircraft.
Oh.
Oh, the satellite. The lower res one was a DMSP satellite. And we usually get radar sat also. I think that one was probably radar sat too. Sorry. Yes.
So I was surprised. My name is Monica Medina. I used to be the U.S. Commissioner to the International Whaling Commission, and so I share your passion for protecting the rights of our indigenous people to whale up in the Arctic. I'm curious about your comments because we share our quota with the Russians.
Yeah.
And so I would think that they have awareness of our desire to protect those rights. And they certainly desire to protect the rights of their native peoples to whale, and so do other countries with native peoples within the Arctic.
Well, we did have that problem that the Russians didn't allow participation by their native peoples in one of the recent meetings. So that's kind of been a bit of a problem. And we have had issues of getting them back and forth to Alaska. But I think those have been pretty well resolved. And the whaling, I think, is not really a problem. It's just getting the representation. The problem in Russia is that they don't have enough money to get on planes to fly the meetings. And that's a big problem. I don't think people realize that the native peoples in Alaska, if you go try and meet with them at the last minute and expect them to sign off on your ship ops, they've got oil and gas industry and reviews that are this thick, with just a few people to do those reviews in a village of, however many people are in Barrow, 1,200, 1,800 people. So they really, and the situation is worse in Russia because the villages of native people are smaller. Yeah. And so the ability for them to have the money to go to these international meetings is more of a problem than anything else.
I agree with you completely on the ship strike and the interactions with the migrations. It's a tremendous problem that a lot of people may not see coming, but
we're making progress on that, and Margot has, we happen to be using the hydrophones to listen for illegal fishing, but those hydrophones also listen for whales.
Have you worked with any of the NOAA scientists that I know are working, and there's a lot of them actually internationally at universities working to do ocean sound mapping for whales?
Yes, I have been. It happens. Anybody else? Maybe we got some time back.
Engineering and adjunct faculty in H. And our colleagues. And Kurt's colleagues on the DevBell teams, Paul Sassman and Brendan Kenny. So thank you for presenting to us today.
Great, thank you. Today we're going to try and give you a sense of some of the things that we do at Google, the challenges that we try to tackle. And our goal behind all of this is trying to enable all of you to do more with what you have in your world. So we're not always here to produce the full solution, but we want to tackle those problems that get in your way and let you do your job better. And there were some comments yesterday about marine spatial planning or coastal marine spatial planning, depending on which organization you happen to be talking to. And if you guys are interested, we actually have a paper with the NOAA in the U.S. Coast Guard Journal that came out recently that can give you a sense of some of the things that we're thinking about. It's just a small hint at some of the stuff that we would like to help out with. So I recommend you give that a look. It's available on the web from the Coast Guard